Hello, everyone, and welcome to Multitap, the video game podcast where we pick a topic about games, debate why our choice is best, and try to choose a winner. Today we have 3 judges and 3 debaters. The first judge is myself, Chad, and our next judge is Nick. Say hi, Nick.
Hello, Nick.
And the final judge is Brendan. Say hello.
Hello.
Now, time to move to our fighters this episode. First off is Jack.
I am here, yes.
Next is Matt.
Hello.
And last but not least, Brian.
Shalom.
Now we've changed the rules up some since we've last appeared, and they are thus. We're going to have 4 rounds. An introduction round, where every person debating gets to give a quick statement on what games they are throwing into the ring and why. Next is the discussion round, where the participants talk for a little over a half hour about their topics and try to show why they are right and the others are wrong. Then we have a question round, where the judges get to ask some questions directly to each debater about their topics and to further delve into specific things. Lastly is the discussion making, where our 3 judges talk for a bit and come to an agreement about who is the winner. So, now that you know how things work, we'll get on with the show. Today's topic is the worst or most obnoxious use of RNG in a game. And whenever he's ready, Matt is going to start us off.
Alrighty. My name's Matt. I'll be talking about the online game Warframe, and in my opinion, I think it is taking this topic and pushing it to the extreme. The entire game is based off of just RNG around every corner. There could be times where you'll be playing and you have to grind to get something else. Good example of this would be it has drop tables that involve getting a relic, which is used as a key, and then using that key to get a percentage of a chance to get something else. And a lot of these start getting gated by higher levels very quickly. So unless you are able to complete the menial tasks and other elements of the game that also involve RNG, you're not able to progress to get anywhere further. It is also a MMO, so they will push for you to buy and pass this RNG by using real life money. Instead, if you are willing, you can take to the grind and get everything the in-game way, so to say. But a lot of times you'll find yourself spending over, probably well over 20 hours a month just trying to keep up with other people. It is, in my opinion, a fun game, but at the same time, it really takes it to the limit. If every single thing involves RNG, at some points it's just going to get to the point where you can't get what you want, even if you try as hard as you want. Your effort doesn't make a difference. It's just going to be you're gated because, that's your luck. Uh, in a lot of the cases, I find it to be a little unbalanced, especially, like I said before, the relic system that involve keys. It can be kind of hard because you can get these relics, and if it spent you hours to get these relics, you have to run those relics, and even while running them, it's not a guaranteed chance to get what you want. It's a small percentage on a table based off of a whole bunch of other items that are gated behind these keys. So even if you spent all your time, you might have to end up doing that again the next day, the day the day after until you finally get what you want. And sometimes you will find yourself grinding single parts or full sets for well into a week or more if things don't go your way, and it does happen. Uh, Warframe overall, I'd say, is an okay game, but its use of RNG could definitely use some tweaking, and I think it has some of the worst uses of RNG in my opinion. And that is the end of my first one.
Thank you, Matt. Next up is Jack.
My submitted topic is the Guiding Lands expansion for Monster Hunter World for PC. The Monster Hunter series has been around for 17 years at this point. It's almost old enough to vote. And the Guiding Lands are a betrayal. The whole gameplay loop of Monster Hunter is you craft weapons and armor, you hunt more powerful monsters, you use the drops from those quests to craft better weapons and armor, and it goes on up the chain until you reach the final boss. The Guiding Lands break almost every rule that's been set up by the series at this point. Normally, you progress through the levels by doing certain hunts that have dedicated monsters, so you can focus on what the parts you need. The guiding lands are a large open area with no specific set spawns, so you have to fish around for the correct monster that you want to hunt. It's actually so bad that they retconned it after a certain update, where you can create what are called lures and up the chances of certain monsters that you want. But in the lure update, they didn't include a update to allow you to get the certain gems you want, which are extraneous things that you put onto the weapons and armor that you get from the monsters. So we're multiple levels deep here, and given how bad the guiding lands are, they're actually called the grinding lands by most of the player base. This is actually mathematically exponentially extending your playtime. And there are certain monsters you can't hunt until you've beaten the guiding lands. You have to get up above hunter rank 100 in order to fight the upper tier bosses. And these are iconic bosses from throughout the series' history, like Fatalis and Elatrion. Those names probably don't mean anything to the casual observer, but those of us who have played the games for this long are artificially gated off from hunting them until the guiding lands have been completed. It's not that, oh, you can go hunt them, but you'll get destroyed, as in you're playing some other MMO game. You actually are barred from the content. Now, this is going more anecdotally at this point, but a friend of mine and we never got past the guiding lands together. We never got to the end of this game, even though we played it for over a year and a half together. And for a series that originally had so much integrity, it doesn't have microtransactions, it's beloved in multiple countries. It's honestly a betrayal. Everything about the Guiding Lands update is artificial. The difficulty, the playtime, the drop rates, everything. I have the last 20 seconds, and I could do that by playing the end quest jingle 20 times in a row just to simulate what it's like to play through the Guiding Lands. But I've eaten up my time by just saying I would do that, so you guys are just going to have to imagine it. I'm done.
Thank you, Jack. Brian, you ready?
Well, I'm ready. All right. So, in a very short 3 minute span, I would like to introduce you to the arguably 2 to 3.5 year cycle that was World of Warcraft between the Legion expansion and the Battle for Azeroth expansion. To average gamers, RNG in this category that I will be discussing is not that big of an issue, but to the upper echelon in-game raiders, there is a span of time that expended through this, essentially where the RNG for the loot system, involving a mechanic known as Titan Forging, single-handedly was the one system that influenced whether or not you had a good raid week, whether or not you could clear the next boss, and ultimately, in my opinion, is the worst example of RNG in one of the most critically acclaimed MMOs. This system, Titan Forging, essentially on a 1 to 3% chance, a boss that would drop a piece of loot for you during your raid progression would have a 1 to 3% chance to have a 10 to 15 item level increase randomly determined by the boss table. Normally, not that big of an issue. However, proceeding into Mythic raiding, everything is what it needs to be very specifically. There is no room for error, and there were many times where if you did not receive your Titan Forged piece of loot for that extra 10 to 15 item levels to increase your base stats, you would not be invited to raid. There are many times that I did not receive my Titan Forged pieces of loot after clearing the raid content every single week for 2.5 years straight. To me, this is a system that Blizzard has done so poorly and has finally acknowledged in the last year with the new expansion. But even then, the egregious amount of time wasted during this expansion will live with me forever. And ideally, this is a system that will never return, simply because I would hate to do exactly what I did and not be able to reach the same threshold, barring players from seeing content that they pay monthly subscriptions for, simply because RNG prevents them from getting the gear they need to continue raid progression. It was the most counterintuitive system, and Blizzard spent 3 years, darn near 3 years, not listening to the player base, not understanding the actual problem for the game, and then on top of it, adding an additional 2% mechanic to then randomly throw you a socket for your gear to continue your gear progression even further down the rabbit hole than we already were. I'm very excited to get into our discussion, as I'm very heated about this topic. I wish I had more than 3 minutes to discuss this, but we'll go forward from here.
Those are some pretty good first thoughts, everybody. Now it's time to get to the discussion round, whenever you guys are ready.
All right, I suppose I can seize the mic. When we're talking about like the most egregious use of RNG in a video game system, I suppose we should each like hammer out what we think is the definition of most egregious. Like, is it railroading your play style the most? Is it abusive to your time? Uh, does it contribute to the nebulous feel bads that occur when you're playing a game? So that I'd just like to invite you guys to say what's your definition? What did you base your game choice on for this debate?
I think particularly when coming to terms to determine what is egregious in this situation, I would say specifically RNG that bars you from content should not be a core game mechanic in any design aspect for any game, not even just my game. That is to me something that is just irrefutable mistakes the devs can completely avoid by understanding actual game mechanics.
Okay, so like I brought up saying it's not that, oh, you can go attempt this high level quest, but you'll die without the grinded materials. It's
Correct.
you can't even attempt it.
Correct. Yeah, you straight up cannot do the content unless you meet the requirement.
In my game choice topic, I'd say Warframe could represent a lot of those, especially when it comes to the time grind. There is stuff in base game just to unlock the rest of the solar system so you can progress and go to other planets and nodes. You have to meet certain requirements. Some of those do involve crafting certain weapons, which crafting the weapon one, you have to get the blueprint and then get the resources required. So even at that, there's a grind within. So it definitely, for me, the strongest reason Warframe chose for my RNG reason would be the time grind. There is some content that it will lock you out of. Most of it's early, and by late game, it's optional, just depending if you can keep up, if you have the right loot and have the right setups. But when it comes to just getting around the star map and being a beginner, there's a lot of grind you have to put in and hope for the right things to drop so you can continue your progression.
Which is
Alright.
fair. I mean, I don't have necessarily an issue with there being a grinding mechanic because I've played quite a bit of Warframe recently and originally when the game first released. So I definitely understand. I just think that grinding for content, hoping that one thing drops, if it is a core design that way, cannot feel as punishing as receiving something you need but not receiving a completely upgraded version to continue progressing forward for the next piece of the puzzle. Having to loot something twice because of you needing it for progression is honestly my biggest issue with that span of time in World of Warcraft from 2016 to 2019. You would literally not only farm bosses for weeks, but you would receive something and then have to receive the same item again, upgraded, to be able to push to the next mode of the dungeon. And to me, it's an absolute slap in the face.
When it came to progressing to the dungeon, was it WoW would actually lock you out, or was it players were basically gating you because they didn't think
It was
that
both.
you had?
It was
Okay.
both. There's a minimum item level requirement for certain tiers of raids, not only enforced by the game mode itself, but also enforced specifically by the player base. Because the game is dissected so hard at that point, especially within the top 5% of raiding guilds. You are in a position where to continue progression, you have to do everything in your power to make sure that your character's output is the maximum potential threshold. Whether that be through your own gameplay or through gear, most of the time it was both. And the gear was the main issue. Honestly, most players have dissected enough to the point where you can log the entire raid and you can reduce all mechanical input to what it has to be. You can perfectly optimize your gameplay, but
Yeah,
what you
something
cannot
RTS
do.
players will call the macro versus micro management. You
Correct.
said macro's pretty much solved as far as WoW goes.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it all comes down to micromanagement. And really, the micro gameplay for WoW is gear is gemming, is sockets, is enchantment. Sockets are easy. New World of Warcraft, most recent expansion, you can buy sockets for your gear. You can buy enchants for your gear. Hell, you can even buy the legendaries you need to craft. You no longer have to loot or randomly get a legendary. But the gear itself now, to comparison to 3 years ago, is something where the item levels are static. There is no variable to the item level. You know what item level gear you're going to get. However, previously, you were unable to determine the base. The only thing you were given is the base item level of the gear. However, the player base was cognizant that you need the upgraded gear to have enough extra critical strike or have enough intelligence on your caster just to make sure that you're meeting your potential damage output. So there are many fallacies in World of Warcraft, and to me, the loot has always been the biggest problem. There are other systems in place that are just egregious, but I won't discuss Blizzard as a whole. I'm discussing a simple game mechanic. It to me, this added on top of this, there was many trinkets that were needed, and these trinkets are just small off pieces of gear, not your main pieces of gear. But your power level was directly determined by your trinkets. If you did not get upgraded trinkets that had a gem socket, you needed to farm that boss every single week on your main character or all of your raiding characters until it dropped at one point. I killed Wither Jim is a boss that was on the island in the Legion expansion. I killed him 1,100 times and never saw the Arcano crystal that was mandatory for my monk class at the time. I simply could not do as much damage as the other monks in the game that had this trinket. And there was nothing more I could do than attempt to kill the boss every week and received an upgraded version of the item.
Now, in the case of both games, Jack and Brian, is this something that's still ongoing, or is this something that they addressed? Because in the case of Warframe, in my personal opinion, being around since I have been around for quite a while, I think they've taken the RNG to a whole new level. It didn't used to be as gated as it is now, and it wasn't you have to unlock this to unlock that to get a chance for that. It was you could go in and work to get something, and it felt more rewarding. There was still RNG, but it was more of a direct forward. You'd get the key and go get an item. It wasn't hope for a chance. Did the games get better, or have they gotten worse?
Well, there's a topic that's come up a few times, more of a phantom thread that's gone through our conversation so far, and that's time invested and versus time that you would expect to invest in it in your play style. Like if I were to use a boss example from my game, the Monster Hunter has a very distinct play style for different weapons. If you want to upgrade a slicey weapon, you'll need a severed tail, one severed tail in order to upgrade it. And if you want to upgrade a big bonky weapon, you'll need like a horn that you've smacked off a monster's head. But the guiding lands, what I think makes them the most egregious is you need for the Glavenus, for example, you need a certain tail edge to upgrade your slicey weapon if you want to make a better Glavenus slicey weapon. If you wanted to upgrade your better Glavenus slicey weapon in the Guiding Lands, you need 18 Guiding Lands Glavenus tail edges, which is it's difficult to put that into words how much of a jump that is for a series like Monster Hunter, where normally the highest you need are like 6 scales, which you can get reasonably from a single mission. There is the jump is obscene. And furthermore, if you're trying to upgrade a bonky Glavenus weapon in the Guiding Lands, you still need those 18 tail edges. There are no Glavenus horns that you can get in the Guiding Lands. So it commits this sin that I think should also be added to the conversation, which is how railroaded are you by these by the RNG? Because if you have multiple avenues of getting items that you could need, then there's wiggle room, and we can bring up microtransactions and taking the easy way out later on. But when it came to the Guiding Lands, the jump was just so immense from a game series that's nearly 20 years old and spent 19 of those years establishing very strict proportions of what you need to progress. That I think it's the most sinful example out of all the games we're talking about.
I will say, at least to hit both your point and Matt's point, Jack. Um, Matt, I will agree. World of Warcraft has improved, at least specifically on the topic that I'm discussing today. This specific mechanic that affected the game for the duration, about 3 years, is no longer in the game. But there are other egregious uses of RNG in the game currently. But it is more focused. Essentially, now the issue with the game, at least in my opinion, is that kind of similar to how you had spoken, being able needing something to progress the content. There are many mechanics in the game in World of Warcraft that you need a keystone in mythic dungeons now to progress to the next level of the dungeon to continue increasing your weekly gear rewards or even your dungeon gear rewards. And it is just another example that while I don't, this problem currently does not exist in the game. For the duration it existed, it is the longest period of time that any example like this has stuck with me for the game. There are still problems with the game currently, but not this exact problem. And Jack, I also get what you're saying as well, that there is a difference between expected time invested and practical, or actual time invested. And that to me is what the biggest problem with that system was, is that I have no problem re-clearing and killing bosses over and over every week. That is a core mechanic to World of Warcraft and what you do in a raiding guild. The problem is that if I have to have three characters to try and make three different attempts every week to try and bring my best foot forward, I'm investing triple the time to try and meet this requirement to make sure that I am still able to play the game. And I definitely see that. Obviously, that jump that you had mentioned in Monster Hunter is fairly large, because like you had said, that game was very established for a very large period of time. Same is kind of akin to World of Warcraft. There, the systems are fairly expected. It's not very new player friendly, but once you have a foot for it, you kind of understand that, I'm not going to get everything I need immediately within my first clear of a dungeon or a raid, but you at least have an idea that there is a semi time scale where, if you continue to clear the content regularly, you will eventually get what you need. And my point being specifically that during this period of time, there was no clear progression other than this is the item you need, and it also needs to be upgraded 25 item levels. If you do not get it, hey man, sorry, I can't invite you to raid because the other monk in our guild has this trinket, has this armor that has the random socket and the random levels to give him more agility. He actually just does more damage than you. Clear it by yourself, pug it, publicly run the group by yourself with another guild or with random players and hope you get it to come next week.
Yeah, some other smaller points for comparisons between all of our games would be trading systems. If we're talking about items that are ridiculously difficult to find, do any of our games have like avenues for players to give items they don't need to other players? Because Monster Hunter does not. It lets you trade stuff in low rank and high rank, which are the playthroughs 1 and 2, but the guiding lands take place in playthrough 3. So,
Mhm.
it doesn't have trading when you actually need it.
Uh, I can answer this one very quickly. Warframe does, but it's unfortunate because the community, yes, over time has gotten much better, especially towards more new player friendly scenarios. They'll help people try and unlock some of the necessary stuff by trading them if possible, but not everything in Warframe is tradable. On top of that, you can expect everybody to try and gouge you in the actual in-game market unless you go to the third-party outside website source, Warframe Market. And to make things even better, if somebody does get a chance to trade you, a lot of times they will just rip you off or just give you the worst crap, or a lot of times not be cooperative or willing to communicate or talk and discuss about it. Good example, last night I was spending a couple hours farming what they call Requiem relics so that I could get a chance to crack it open and get a couple, I'm going to call them runes or wards, that I could put on a hidden blade to complete a certain part of a quest I had to get a gun. I had been spending at least, I want to say, 6 or so hours, and not solely doing that, but for the most part trying to get those relics, run them, open them, and get a chance to get the word I need. but I also had to get the relic I needed that contained the word I need. And by the end of the day, I had no luck. So I said, screw it. So I went to the market. Now, if I wanted to buy one of these mods, I could message somebody. So I put a request out. Upon doing so, I get a request, answer the trade, go to it. He was the only person who actually was willing to trade with me, and he had the word I needed. It was the last thing I needed to complete this quest, so I just said, fuck it. I had platinum, or what you'd call the currency for in-game, and I traded him. It was 10 platinum, and he ended up trading me the mod, which these mods, or runes, specifically have 3 uses, and right when we had both put up the trades before accepting, he said, oh, this only has 1 use left. And I was like, screw it. He was the only person who was willing to talk to me. And I know for a fact it could have been his only one, or he could have had one with a 3 and just pawned off the one to me because he still gets his platinum either way. It can be very predatory, honestly. It makes things a lot worse because people will take advantage of new players and people that are on their wits' end trying to grind for these things, and it will push them to the limits where they will either buy platinum with real life money to trade them, or just go buy the gun themselves, if optional, even, because it's not always an option to buy what you're looking for. Sometimes you have to buy the platinum and then work with the trade system to get to what you want. I don't know about WoW. How does WoW work with things, Brian?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, yes, you can buy things with real money in World of Warcraft. It is a highly bannable offense, and Blizzard has done actually one of the only things they've done well in recent years is cracking down on real money transfers, real money purchases through third parties. And essentially, you're not, you can buy an item through someone, but they're going to farm your character on your account for your money in the content that you need for the item because the item still has to drop.
Oh, so there's no trading, but what you're saying is they will volunteer to play on your account and do the grinding for you.
Correct. There are some things that are tradable in World of Warcraft. There are bind on pickup items, which are BOP. They are soul bound to your character. They cannot be traded. They can be vendored. They can be sold to a vendor for gold. But normally you're only going to get a very low gold return for items you don't need. There are bind on equip items that drop in raids. And that was another big issue. I'm glad you brought it up, at least something that I could discuss, is that these items, these bind on equip items, could also Titan Forge in this mechanic. So normally it would be like a set of bracers, like a pair of boots, things that are not core pieces of your gear, but those bracers could be your best in slot. And if they're bind on equip, the likelihood of you getting them from raid is very low if you're just running like random with public runs. If you're running with a guild, your chances increase. But those Titan forged pieces of gear, like especially bracelets, your wrist guards, they would sell for millions of gold in World of Warcraft, especially if they had a socket or if they were already enchanted. There are only certain pieces of gear that can be bought and sold, so it doesn't innately fix the problem when it existed. Because actually, if anything, I think that it's one of the main reasons the market was ruined in World of Warcraft and Legion is the gold threshold increased because the cost of these bind on equip items, some guilds were buying them for 3 to 4 million gold, and the gold cap in World of Warcraft is 9 million gold. So there's a threshold where the economy suffered because of this change, the player base suffered because of the change, and on top of it, regardless of what could happen, the only time you could ever trade bind on pickup gear, your soulbound gear, is when you're in a raid. As long as that piece of gear is not an upgrade for the person who looted it, they are able to trade you if you were in their raid group. However, most of the time, if it is a Titan Forged piece of gear that is 35 item levels higher than what it's supposed to be, that person could not even trade it to you if they wanted to because it was considered an upgrade for their character, and they are ineligible to trade upgradable items to another player.
Okay, and this would be just like a PSA for the judges. The reason I was laying all this out is all of our games have different barriers to entry.
Correct.
Warframe is a free-to-play game, which as a result, the money is apparently made by third-party haggling, the players trading amongst themselves. Monster Hunter is a $60 premium is a $60 game that you just buy in with the DLC, and it doesn't have any meaningful way of trading. You're just grinding. And World of Warcraft is a subscription-based game, which means time is of the essence. So there's a apparently actually illegal from a like law litigation standpoint, black market of people who will loan their accounts out to others just because time and playtime is such a currency. So keep that all in mind when you're evaluating the context of all of our complaints for how these games are set up.
I honestly
Good
find
point,
it
Jack.
really interesting you bring that up, Jack, because it's sad to see that a lot of these games come back and they still have some of the same issues with this RNG and the time that it adds to the game instead of adding actual gameplay. They're hoping that these mechanics and these barriers will keep you around and have you running and doing the same stuff just to add time to their game. I was gonna ask, uh, I forget. Somebody go ahead if they have something. I'll come back.
Oh, I had plenty.
Okay. I'd say we were talking about percentage drops earlier, which obviously this is a moot point because we already established that you go into games with different expectations. You go into World of Warcraft expecting a grindy experience. You go into a Monster Hunter expecting a moderately grindy experience. But I will say what's you were talking earlier like 1 to 3 percentage drops. Like you could pinpoint like the actual analyzed numbers. When it comes to the guiding lands, Monster Hunter normally has essays written on how to play against certain monsters, what items are effective, what techniques and spacing and environmental movements work. But when it comes to actual numbers, the guiding lands items, if you look on the wiki right now, do not have percentages because no one has been able to figure them out. They are that out of step with the way the game is put together.
I would love to add to that, Jack, because the number that I got, the 1 to 3% that I was using, is an estimated number because, like Monster Hunter, World of Warcraft will not tell you, especially Blizzard, would never tell you what the percentage chance is for you to receive an upgraded item. If anything, the only people that actually determined even an estimate percentage for this impact on the gear drop was the add-on developers, which aren't Blizzard employees that design add-ons to help increase quality of life functionality in World of Warcraft. Specifically, it took I can't remember who wrote the article. It was a mod developer who worked with some of the biggest add-ons in World of Warcraft. Deadly Boss mods and Bigwigs are two basically raid add-ons that are used to help track boss mechanics during fights, help alleviate movement, and kind of give you a general idea of timers for boss actions and mechanics. They spent, I believe it took them 6 months to even have an estimated figure on how to gauge what your likelihood chance is of getting a Titan Forge piece of gear. And that was only after the first year that it was a mechanic, and Blizzard increased the number statistically per patch notes in 2017. That was the only way that they were able to formulate a guess. Within the first year of release of the Titan Forging and War Forging mechanic was the slower version of Titan Forging. It's essentially the same thing. It just wasn't, you didn't hit the 1 to 3%. You may have hit the 3 to 5% and got 10 item levels instead of 15. They spent 6 months of the expansion's release trying to help determine to the player base, because World of Warcraft is a lot like Monster Hunter in the sense that players are aware of things going into it. They're, obviously they're aware. The player base is kind of, you at least have the resources to find out, oh, hey, this mount that I want is a 2% drop from the boss. I'm going to have to farm it. Or like, the gear that I need is a 10% drop chance. If I statistically kill this X amount of times, I'll eventually get it. They could not do that for any of these mechanics to even inform the player base of what the additional time invested would take to meet the threshold to receive these items. And that to me is the biggest slap in the face. I had many forum posts during this time, as during this time in World of Warcraft, I was in what's considered a top US guild. We were one of the 55th highest rating guild in the US at the time. And, I was proud of my achievement. And unfortunately, the last half of the expansion, I didn't get to raid because I was raiding all on my own because I did not receive what I needed after killing bosses week after week after week. And without at least some of the resources that I had a general idea of what I needed to do every week. But unfortunately, regardless of my time invested, I could not meet those thresholds, and it's just unfortunate to me. I am glad that it's better now than it was, but like I said originally in my introduction, that this is one of the few things that World of Warcraft has always had its problems. This is the problem that's stuck with me since it's happened, and I can't think of another mechanic that has actually made me consider not playing the game after being a long time subscriber.
Real quick, Jack, I was gonna ask, what's your worst experience you've had with RNG personally in Monster Hunter?
Personally in Monster Hunter, it wasn't even the guiding lands. It was several years back when I tried to play a low rank mission where I needed a for context. This is one of the items that did have a fixed drop rate, 1% chance to get a Rathalos plate, and I did that mission 54 times, which may not sound like a lot, but in Monster Hunter, that is you're expected to clear through it through the story mode in probably 9 or 10 hours, and hunts take 50 minutes. So 50 minutes times 54 hunts, that's no chump change when it comes to Monster Hunter. And again, I keep wanting to stress that when we're talking about uh, how predatory the RNG is in these games, it's always in relative to what you're expecting to grind.
For sure.
It,
Uh,
Go ahead, Jeff.
I don't think there's any phrase that strikes fear into the heart of a statistician analyst more than arbitrarily large number. And I think that'll be like the big white whale. Whoever can claim that their game has a point where your chances of progressing are an arbitrarily large number to one, that's the death knell of a game. Not that I'm challenging either of you
Yeah.
or myself to try to claim that title.
Matt,
I
I
know-
can give you my most egregious. This is unrelated to the topic I brought to discussion, but I can give you the most RNG that I've dealt with in World of Warcraft if you were interested.
yeah, go for it.
So Wrath of the Lich King, third World of Warcraft, second World of Warcraft expansion, third WoW game. Looking back, uh, best raid in my one of the best raids in my opinion ever released. Ice Crown Citadel has one of the most infamous mounts in the game. Granted, this is not correlating to my topic, but this is just RNG in World of Warcraft that exists. The mount, I believe, is a 1.1% drop chance from the final boss. The raid takes, with full movement speed gear, I can clear the raid on every character I have within 19 minutes, about. I've ran that raid 1,100 times since release, and I still do not have the mount. I farm it every week on 10 characters.
So that's still something that's an option to get in the game, though?
Yep, can still get it. Have never got it.
Okay.
It's one of the only mounts I'm missing.
That brings me around at perfect timing, too. For Warframe, one of my worst experiences was they have the base frames that you can get, which is just the regular ones, but they're special that they work on, and the thing that they promote is I don't want to say overpowered, the stronger type is the primed version. So they'll do primed weapons and warframes. It used to be you'd join a tower with a key, so you'd have to grind the keys, get those keys, and then try and work on getting the frame you want part by part. There was a point where I was trying to get, I think it was the Frost Prime systems, and it was the last part I needed to complete this set, and I'd spend hours just grinding these missions, survivals, and everything else under the sun, and I could only go for an hour each mission, but I did it surely over 50 times because he was unfortunately the system that they use in place is they will vault and get rid of these primes and the relics that drop them. So it's you get it now or you can wait. And this is no exaggeration. It was probably almost 3 years after his vaulting until they brought him back. So it was a situation where you grind now, you work on it, you go for it, or else you're not going to get him. And it's one of those things where I personally, when I was going through that, there was people and there still is people in Warframe who will play survival missions and other missions for hours on end because they have all of the higher tier loot and the end game mods and some of the other stuff that you get from RNG. Mods in this case would be similar to how you were describing the trinkets from World of Warcraft. So it's still something you have to work for and get, and it makes your power and everything else increase, and you can place them on your warframes or on your weapons. I couldn't keep up with those guys. I'd die, and back when this was happening, it was you get 4 revives, and after that you pay platinum to revive again. So it was literally live as long as you can, and then once you're out, you're out. It became a situation where I was forced sort of to trade for it because I only ended up getting one, and I wanted to get another. That's for separate reasons. But the whole shtick is it took me a week and over 50 runs to get one of those. And part of the reason is because I was out leveled. The second reason is because it was sort of gating me because I didn't have the other drop requirements to keep myself alive. So even if I had that stuff, I might have had a better chance, but it was a situation where I knew I wouldn't have a chance to get this again unless I did it now. So it was really frustrating because you're stuck on a time limit then. You don't know because when they vault it, you're not going to know when it's coming back. It it's uh it's a frustrating restraint, in my opinion, when it comes to that with Warframe.
Yeah, it seems like it just completely devalues your effort put into the game, and I think Jack said it pretty well that most people have a good expectation based on what kind of game you're playing. I don't think many players play World of Warcraft thinking they're not going to have to grind things, or they play Warframe knowing that eventually once you clear through what is available to you, you will have to grind through them. Same with Monster Hunter, actually, especially because I know that game has new game plus and everything, right, Jack? That's kind of how like the end game progresses.
Yeah, until the guiding lands were introduced, the game used to have a pretty clear linear progression, not one that hits an exponential cliff.
Yeah, and I think all of our games, at least from what we've discussed, have at least been enlightened to games that I have played before, but not nearly as much as you have, Matt, or to games that I haven't played at all. And there are definitely similarities where it feels the worst, in my opinion, that if you are barred from content simply because of not receiving an item or a multitude of items that you are required, regardless of time invested, and other avenues don't exist for you to continue progression, whether that even being real money. I'm one of those people that I don't have a problem buying gold in World of Warcraft as long as, it's something I can do directly from WoW. If I want to buy a level boost, I don't mind doing it. It's one of those things that I have to weigh my personal time of leveling another character versus, wanting to put that in. But the fact that there are so many issues with so many different types of games in our threshold is very interesting. I am just personally, I definitely do feel the arguments you all have made. I just don't know if this is my I don't know the best word for it. My own personal vendetta against Blizzard due to the egregious nature of barring myself and multiple members of my guild for damn near 2 years. It it just stings not being able to do anything about fixing the game you play and pay for.
Yeah,
I
we're
completely
running low
agree.
on time, so I'll introduce like the last topic that we've touched on, which is microtransactions. You both said that like there are microtransactions in your game, and I I know anecdotes are cheap, but for me, you can't your way to better gear in Monster Hunter. It's something that Capcom's been adamant about. But while helping my one friend work his way through the guiding lands, there was such a despair that set in after a while that I went to the store and bought myself a cosmetic. And I am a tightwad with my money, so I never do stuff like that. But I just did it because there was no sense of forward progression. And it didn't affect my gameplay at all, but I just had that cosmetic and it's one of my most pitiful moments as a gamer, I think, was buying that just because I had nothing else. I coughed up money because I coughed up money for something worthless because the game wasn't giving me what I needed.
Yeah, I get it, man. Trust me, I feel the same way every time if I don't want to farm gold or level a character in WoW. I hate giving Blizzard money at this point in my life, but sometimes I have to weigh my time. And thank God I can't buy gear because honestly, I probably would if I decided I didn't like a raid expansion or a raid tier and I didn't want to play it just because I didn't like Blizzard at the time. Sometimes I might do it if I want to at least have things for unlocking it. But yeah, no, I get it. I've bought many character boosts and just felt nothing but regret because it's unfortunate you get put in that circumstance.
I can see where you're coming from, Brian, but at the same time, especially since they offer the same thing in Warframe. They give you resource boosters, resource drop chance boosters, affinity boosters, which is their XP system. I I see where you're coming from, but at the same time, especially for people in your situation where you're a busy guy, you work, you have life going on, I can see it being semi-beneficial, and that's if it helps. But other than that, I do have to agree, and I also find it interesting that you have a server monthly game, I have a free to play, and Jack has the $60 actual studio game, and we are the ones who got stuck with the microtransactions. I just find that to be kind of funny.
Yeah, isn't it? It's funny how it works out that way. I agree.
And we all feel the same despair. I know we're wrapping up here. Well, I can't say anything else because we got 15 seconds left. But yeah, it's a pity this took such a dour note towards the end. There's supposed to be a fun debate about which games we felt comically screwed by.
Yeah,
Man,
I was really excited that I was hoping it would be a way more clear cut, but now I just feel disdain for all types of games.
Ah, well.
Yeah, it is what it is.
I gotta say, I'm with you guys on this. It got pretty depressing really fast.
I have to agree.
Now, we get into the questions round, where the judges get to ask the questions. Who'd like to go first?
All right, this is not really a question, but I want Jack to re-clarify the fact that Monster Hunter does not actually have New Game Plus in the sense that like you start the game over with your character and you are literally doing the same stuff again. It's more like the game is broken up into discrete tiers of like this is the low rank, and then the middle of the game is explicitly called high rank and there's explicitly better stuff, and then the final one is like it's not actually New Game Plus. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I should say I dwelt more on like the applied comparisons throughout the game without actually establishing the framework for how the game works. That was probably my bad. But the point is, with Monster Hunter's progression is you have every game has like its starter monster, and then like a middle of the game, ooh, here's the monster that's a skill gate, and then the final boss. And it will do that for what is colloquially called low rank. And then when you reach high rank again, the starter monster will appear again, but now it's X amount of times more powerful. It deals more damage. It
Yeah,
soaks up more damage.
but
And that, yeah,
it's not just colloquially called low rank. Like that is like that's in the game. Like it's low rank. Like that's what it's called in game. That's all I'm trying to say.
yeah, colloquially it was a misnomer. When I say it has like playthroughs, I mean distinct epochs of your gameplay experience. And the Guiding Lands really bucks that because instead of fighting a new batch of a new batch of hunts where you select your monster and then fight them an arbitrary amount of times, it's a big open area with random monster spawns that can utterly bone you if you don't find what you're looking for. And if you do find what you're looking for, it doesn't drop what you want. If it does drop what you want, you don't get enough of it, and just endlessly, like I said, literally exponentially more tedious.
I'd like to take the next question here. Matt, how often do they recycle prime focused missions? You said that one mission you had to wait 3 years for it to come back. Is that like common at all?
Oh, very common. It's one of those things where they'll cycle other primes, but if it's the one you want, if it's not the one you want, it doesn't matter. So, best example, they're going to be useless names, but you give you a good idea of reference. The Frost Prime that took about 2 years. During that pack, there was also another Warframe called Ember. She came back, I think, after Frost, so it was Frost, then Ember. And then as they're doing all this, they're releasing new primes, and they're putting the older primes on that list back into the vault, and they're adding to that vault essentially. So the vault's gotten bigger since I started playing. They've only added more primes to it because they only want to have, I think it's like probably a list of probably 20 primes out available at a time, and honestly 20 might be pushing it. It's probably closer to 15, and then they'll cycle one of those primes back into the vault and add another one back from the vault into the rotation. And as this list gets bigger, it's going to take longer each cycle. So you really have to work to getting what you want, or you're not going to see it for a while. And then there's also the chance, what if you are not really into the game or you don't have access to the game at that time? You might be somewhere it's not something you can plan around, since even that is adding to real life RNG. It's hard to plan for something you don't know when it's going to happen. It's upsetting, but it is unfortunately a part of the game.
Thank you so much for answering that question, Matt. Whoever else has a question can go next.
Yes, I've got one for Brian.
Daddy.
Do you think because your argument focuses on the more advanced and seasoned World of Warcraft players that it's at all weakened by the sheer number of players that just like don't reach that extremely technical level of play and just kind of go about it casually?
Yeah, I would agree that my complaint is definitely centered on being a top 5% player in the game. I don't think it necessarily weakens it, as I think that 5% is such a, I don't want to say like a goal for common players, but I think that that's how I started, was a very casual World of Warcraft player. And I looked up to raiders that I wanted to do what they did, and that's kind of how what pushed me in that progression. I don't necessarily think that it weakens the argument, because at the end of the day, I still think that the casual player was just as impacted by the random loot fiesta that was the Titan forging systems, receiving something that was equivocal to in-game rating gear for not putting in the same amount of time as someone who would get in-game rating gear that wouldn't upgrade. I definitely get what you're saying, though. From the outside looking in, I think it does make my argument a bit weaker. But in my stance, I feel that to those players that played during that time that were in the same position as I was, it was by far the only time that within the last 7 years of me being a top 5% WoW player, it's the one thing that stands out to me that made me feel like, regardless of how I was playing the game, I didn't matter to Blizzard. And I feel like the trickle down was definitely real.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This leads me into my next question for Jack. In a similar vein as to what Brendan asked Brian, Jack, you said that the guiding lands is endgame of Monster Hunter World. Is this something that feels necessary for non hardcore players to experience, or does it only affect the hardcore players?
It really is a quality over quantity thing. Not that I would know because I never cleared them, but monsters that are gated off on the other side of the guiding lands, the raging Brachydios, who you get about halfway through after clearing the guiding lands, you get a Latrion, who's just a flagship monster for the series, or Fatalis, which is widely considered by the community the greatest fight out of any of the games. If you are not a hardcore player, you can most likely be fine clearing the story mode and not going on to the guiding lands, but you shouldn't have to be gated off. And in previous Monster Hunter games, you were not gated off like this. You could progress to the absolute most finalist, bossest boss in the game without Monster Hunter wearing the coat of an MMO, because it doesn't fit well for Monster Hunter at all. For a series that's always had so much integrity and purposeful grinding added in, the guiding lands were a very bad experiment that they unfortunately committed to.
Thank you very much. That help explains where this stands in the game better. Does anybody else have any more questions? Because I still have a couple.
I actually don't.
I got one, but you can go ahead.
Well, my next question is for Matt again. Do you think the bigger grind in this game that has been added to Warframe is to make sure the more dedicated players keep on having something to do, to kind of like make sure there's still content for them to achieve?
Okay, sorry, Mike was muted. I want to say they have it appealing for veterans and people coming back to the game for sure. One of the best examples is they swapped from the tower keys farming for the primes to relics. The main difference being, if you had one tower key and you went into a survival, you could stay as long as you'd live. You just have to make it to extraction. So you could be in there for 2 hours and get multiple rewards every 5 minutes on a rotation A, B, and C. Uh, but when they changed that and added relics, they made it so you have to go farm certain missions, get these relics, similar to how you'd have to do for the keys. But then on top of that, you have to farm these void essences to charge those keys to try and alter the results of what your drop will be. And then once you queue with other people, a lot of times the drops don't even represent what they show the table should be. So it also makes a big difference because in a case where you're running like a relic for survival, it can't be done for multiple hours. You have to add a relic each time that A, B, and C reward comes up. It consumes the relic, so it makes it a lot more grindy because you have to go back to these other missions, break out of grinding for the prime, and go get the key to try and grind for the prime, and then go back to the missions and continue that cycle. It gets more tedious in that sense.
Thanks, Matt. Brendan, you can go ahead with your question whenever you're ready.
All right, I've got one for Jack this time. Uh, do you think that the experiment of the guiding lands uh could be seen as worth the try, even though it generally didn't work out, as trying to break new ground instead of adhering rigidly to tradition?
I think the I think the Guiding Lands has a few things to it that separate the hardcore obsessive players from the more recreational ones, which can be a good or bad thing depending on your perspective. The Guiding Lands, if you want to maximize your chances of getting drops, you have to figure out mounting and wall slams and other like high tier techniques that are important. But I keep going back to railroading. Monster Hunter is not normally a series that railroads you into. You will take this route through the game. You will fight these monsters in this order. You will craft this gear, and then you will progress through it. You can do that if you're a player who wants to have optimized gear or you're not confident in your skills. You can do that. But the Guiding Lands flat out requires you. It basically depends on which play style you have. You're basically assigned a monster in the Guiding Lands you have to pursue. And that's not how the game's normally structured. And for that, I would say it is antithetical to the established gameplay experience of Monster Hunter. And for that, I would say the Guiding Lands is a failure.
Thank you.
All right. That is all the time we have for questions. Now we are going to move into the judging round, where the three debaters get kicked to another chat room, and the judges make a final verdict on who the best argument was. Damn, that was close. But it was a really good fight. I think I know who I'm going to go with, though.
I'm actually kind of having a hard time deciding, although I think I like Matt's argument the least.
My first vote is leaning towards Jack right now. One of the big things he said that I kept on thinking about was you shouldn't have to be gated off from things, especially since the games didn't do this before, especially with how many parts you need.
Yeah, from 1 to 18 as he anecdoted about.
Right? I will give it to Brian, though, that some of the best and most sought after things in WoW are those endgame raids.
Well, and the thing is, what you just said at the end there, I think that can also apply to what Jack was saying about Monster Hunter World. He was also repeatedly making the point that some of the most iconic and interesting content is gated behind being the grinding lands. So, when I think about Brian versus Jack, it's like kind of almost a question of scale. Like they're very, very similar in the sense that they have RNG that's all about how much they have to grind, specifically in the end game and to see end game content. But World of Warcraft just dials it up to a whole nother level. And I think Brian was very eloquent when he described all of the different ways in which RNG can fuck you in that game. And like, not to mention that, in Monster Hunter, there's not microtransactions. And in Monster Hunter, there's not the social element of, oh, your build isn't good enough, so you straight up can't come on raids. Like you are like one thing that I don't think Brian really said explicitly, but he probably implied is like not only does it suck that you're not getting invited to raids, but that is theoretically more opportunities to get the item you're missing. So it's like you're getting less trials to get the thing you want even at the same time. So I honestly just think that Jack and Brian had really similar things, but Brian just has this magnitude on his side.
While I agree with Nat, another thing Jack brought up that stuck with me is the jump from grinding in base game to post guiding lands in Monster Hunter. where WoW, you kind of expect to grind out a lot of time. Brian even proved this point when he talked about how the boss he got stuck on longest was roughly similar to how long he got stuck on the raid boss he was talking about in this argument, where that is just not the case in Monster Hunter.
And I'm gonna add on that. And like I haven't really decided between the two yet, although I am kind of leaning towards Jack after you said that, because like, you're not expecting a really long grind, but furthermore, in Monster Hunter games, there is like this action element that's not as present in World of Warcraft. Brian himself even commented on how the actual gameplay of a raid is basically scientifically solved. Like if you're playing a certain class, you have the moves you do, you know the order they go off in, and you sit there and you just do it. And like that's how you do the raid. And like it means that in a game like World of Warcraft, grinding and your set building is more emphasized. And in Monster Hunter, the gamers who play that game are more accustomed to being able to kind of force their way through a grindy system by just playing really well. Like, you know how I play the game. Like, I don't make very much armor or weapons because I can usually just play well enough that I'm like, oh man, now I'm dying a bunch. Now I guess I'll go make armor and stuff. But like, I think that there's a lot of weight that Monster Hunter perhaps thrashes against your expectations more than World of Warcraft.
Exactly. On a different topic, one thing I will give to Matt is how bad the rotation is for unlocking Warframe primes. That has to be so awful to experience, and I would never want to go through that at all.
You know what? I mean, I think I can see how you think that's an okay. I can see how like that sucks and it's like an additional layer of psychological like, oh my God, even after I finally get this thing, I'm still not done. Like if you just break it down to the actual amount of time spent versus expectations. Like I don't know, I just maybe this is just an opinion kind of thing, but that kind of argument just doesn't feel as significant as the ones that Brian and Jack brought up.
Fair enough, for sure. Brendan, where are you standing at in all of this? What do you think? Who did best? All that kind of stuff.
Uh, I think so. I think I liked Matt's the least, but I don't think it's because it's like something that's bad to argue. I just think he could have done a much better job, and Brian and Jack both did a really good job. Especially with the opening, like Brian and Jack were like much more noticeably upset than Matt was, which for arguing like the worst thing that annoyed you the most. Uh, I mean, it's an appeal to emotion, but it's not unimportant. I don't think.
No, I totally agree that passion is really important on an argument like this.
I'm leaning a bit towards Brian. It seemed like he did, at least it seemed like to me, he did a much better job of describing things in detail with how it just kind of throws a wrench into everything at that level of play. And like I mean, like it almost kind of like not entirely takes out the multiplayer part, but significantly like devalues it. And those are like the first two words in that genre of game. And like Jack had a lot of good points, especially like with the difference in expectation and just like how different it was from other Monster Hunters, with like how much that sucked. But I think Brian just sold me a little bit more with his.
I can definitely see where you're coming from, but I think I'm still going to go with Jack just because of what I said earlier. How big of a difference from usual Monster Hunter to Guiding Lands is just something I cannot shake.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
gonna vote for Jack too because like even though I was talking about the thing with scale, I think that there's a very good argument to be made from player expectations that's at least as good, if not better. And if it's as good, then Monster Hunter still wins because of the whole action game disparity thing. So I'm gonna go with Jack.
I am still on Brian, but I don't mind disagreeing.
Well, it sounds like we have our decision. I guess we should probably get everybody back in here and go over everything with them. Alright, Matt, Brian, Jack, I just want to say before we announce a winner that y'all did a wonderful debate and just did a fantastic job.
Oh, you flatter us.
Well, Jack, I'm about to flatter you even more because you are the winner of today's debate.
Oh, really?
The main thing that gave you the vote was your statement on expectations versus reality, the way you explained how much of a jump in the grinding was from pre-guiding lands to post-guiding lands, really won over Nick and I. Brian, you were a runner-up, but WoW has always been super grinding. So while it was awful that you couldn't get into the raids without your items, the expectation of grind was still there.
Oh yeah, that's fine. Honestly, I felt all three of us were really close in this.
And as we said in the other chat, we don't really care who won. We're all glad we got to say our pieces.
Oh, totally agreed for sure. Matt, the two things that kept you from being close to win was not really having a super strong argument, even though some solid points were made, and just not having the level of passion that Brian and Jack did behind their arguments.
Yeah, I can't deny that. It's hard for me to debate hating RNG when I'm so passive against it, and at the same time, pre-game, expect the grind.
You didn't argue the hardest, but you're walking away the least upset, so that's something to take with you.
Well, everyone, I thank you so much for joining us today on Multitap. Look forward to seeing more of these bad boys coming out on some sort of regular basis, hopefully. And we'll see you all next time. Thank you so much for listening.